You guys seem to be really enjoying the Reddit stories, and so I have a bunch more to read today. While I continue, let's get out of the mine and judge some people. I decided to confront my girlfriend. I thought about using some of the lies people suggested, but they just wouldn't make sense. To say I ran into Justine somewhere, well, I told my girl I had to stay home and do stuff around the house. That's why I couldn't go with her to see my SIL. To say Justine was helping me pick out jewelry? It doesn't make sense for her to come all the way to our house to help me pick out a piece of jewelry, unless it was a serious piece of jewelry, like an engagement ring. If I just wanted to get her a gift, I'd ask her friends for suggestions, have them send me pictures over text. None of the excuses made sense. So I decided to just be honest. I basically told her I knew we'd been thinking about marriage, and she probably already suspected a proposal was coming soon. So I invited Justine over to help me find the perfect ring. And that just so happened to be the day she said she was going to see her SIL. So, what's the deal? She immediately started grinning like an idiot, prodding me about the proposal and the ring. But then we circled back to where she'd actually been that day, and she confessed what she was really doing. No, she wasn't cheating, and no, she wasn't picking out a ring for me. The amount of times people guessed that was honestly crazy. So, some people are dog people, some people are cat people. Me? I'm a snake person. Grew up with them my whole life, but I never felt like I could actually get one because my girlfriend's always been uneasy about living with a snake, which, fair enough, I completely respected. Plus, buying and raising a snake is way more complicated than a dog or a cat. So imagine my surprise when she showed me a picture of herself holding the cutest Kenyan sand boa I have ever seen. My girlfriend was planning to surprise me with a snake. We're picking her up next week. I did not see that coming at all. And I feel a little bad for accidentally ruining the surprise, but life is good. Sorry if this isn't the ending you were hoping for. Just a snake. Thanks for reading. Okay, honestly, this one had me sweating. I really thought we were headed toward a cheating reveal. Instead, it's just wholesome. I actually respect that he never pushed for the snake and just waited it out, and she noticed that and surprised him with it anyway. If I were him, I think I'd still be recovering from the emotional whiplash of is she cheating to surprise, we're getting a snake in the span of 2 minutes. So tell me, would you want the pet tax on that Kenyan sand boa? Or is a snake where you personally draw the line as a pet? All right, back into the mine. Let's keep judging people while I read this one. I moved to the US 7 years ago as a grad school student from Indonesia. I met my boyfriend a few months after I moved, and we've been together ever since. He's a US citizen. After I graduated, we had a serious talk about where our relationship was headed. I made it clear I wanted marriage, kids eventually. I remember point blank asking him if he saw that future with me, because I didn't want to be in a relationship going nowhere. He told me he loved me, that we were definitely headed in that direction. As of last week, we'd been together 7 years. We'd talked about marriage on and off, but our careers kept getting in the way of timing. Then my company announced my department might get outsourced. Uh-oh. I'm on an H-1B visa, a temporary work visa, so that means I need a new job fast if I want to stay in the US at all. Last week, on our anniversary, I brought it up, asked him if now was the time to think about marriage, since it would also help sort out my visa situation. He looked like he was about to vomit. After a lot of prodding, he admitted he wasn't planning on marrying me until after I got a green card on my own. His words, he didn't want to be used as a visa mule. I was floored. He'd never once mentioned this in 7 years. He said he wanted to know I was marrying him for love, not as a ticket to stay in the country, something that would only be possible once I already had my green card. Okay, wait, what? I asked if he'd move to Indonesia with me instead. He said no. I didn't handle it well. I left. I genuinely started dating this man because he was the kindest, most thoughtful person I'd ever met. 7 years, and I'm sitting here wondering if he actually knows who I am at all. I thought this relationship might be over. It hurts so much. Now, the actual update. He's my ex-boyfriend. I took a few days, then reached out wanting to talk. He agreed. Turns out he'd been quietly insecure about earning less than me for a while. His friends had apparently been calling me his sugar mommy behind his back because I covered most of our expenses. He never told me any of this. He said he didn't feel like an equal, and that made him start doubting whether I was even with him for love or just for a green card shortcut. I reminded him how he supported me through grad school, groceries when I had nothing, letting me live with him rent-free my last year so I didn't have to take out loans, lending me his car for interviews. I told him I'd been covering expenses now as my way of paying that back, out of love, not obligation. He said he understood, but he also hadn't expected me to out-earn him straight off the bat. I asked if he'd consider couples therapy. He said no. He didn't think he was being unreasonable. Said he wanted to be the provider, didn't feel like one, and there was no fixing that unless I quit my job for one that paid less. That was never going to happen. So, we broke up. His family is apparently in disbelief. They thought a proposal was coming. I've moved into an Airbnb for now. Man, 7 years, and the whole thing quietly rotted underneath because of what his friends were saying in a group chat somewhere. That's the part that gets me. It wasn't even really about the visa in the end, was it? It was about his ego getting poked by people who don't even pay his bills. If I were her, I don't think I could have stayed either. Not because he was insecure, people can work through insecurity, but because he point-blank refused therapy and put the entire burden of fixing it on her shoulders. That's not insecurity anymore. That's an ultimatum. So here's my question for you guys. Is this a case of pride destroying a good relationship? Or do you think she should have seen this provider thing coming way earlier?
Anyway, while we're keeping the gameplay rolling, here's another story that starts off pretty harmless. But trust me, it escalates way more than I expected. About a week after everything happened, I decided to change the layout of my garden. I planted a whole wall of blackberries and raspberries along the 2 sides facing the driveway. I made sure they were about 30 centimeters from the edge so none of the branches hung over onto public property. Behind that little berry wall, I planted strawberries, tomatoes, and a bunch of other stuff. The only way to reach those plants from the driveway would be to push through the berry bushes or walk all the way up to my house, past my windows, and into my backyard. There's absolutely no way someone could do that by accident. For about 2 weeks, things were surprisingly quiet. I still caught the neighborhood kids standing on my driveway almost every single day. But as far as I could tell, they weren't coming into the garden anymore. So I figured the bushes were actually doing their job. Well, that didn't last very long. About a week ago, berry season finally started. The raspberry bushes were packed, the strawberries were ready to pick, and apparently my neighbors noticed that too. The first people I caught were the boys. They were standing there picking raspberries and eating them like it was some kind of free buffet. I stopped them, took them home, and told their mom I'd caught them stealing. Yeah, I know it's fruit, but it's still my property. I also warned her that next time I'd call the police. She rolled her eyes, told me to grow up, and took the kids inside anyway. After that, things were quiet again. Until yesterday. I got home after being out for a while, and there they were. Not just the kids. Their dad was standing right in the middle of my garden with both of his sons, clearing out my berry bushes and picking whatever they could find. I didn't even bother arguing. I quietly stayed where I was, called the police before they noticed me, and started recording everything on my phone. About 10 minutes later, 2 officers showed up. The neighbors were still picking berries when the police walked over. The officers immediately told them they were trespassing and that taking the berries actually counted as theft. They explained that I could press charges if I wanted. For the first time since this whole thing started, I actually saw the dad look nervous. He kept stumbling over his words and glancing back toward his house like he was hoping his wife would come outside and somehow rescue him from the situation. Instead, the officers took all of them inside to talk. A little while later, the police came back over and asked me whether I wanted to press charges. I asked them one question instead. Do you think I scared them enough that they'll stay away now? One of the officers smiled a little and said the husband definitely seemed shaken. But apparently, his wife spent the entire conversation yelling at both the officers and her husband, calling me every name she could think of. So, I decided not to press charges, at least not yet. Instead, I asked if I could install another security camera on my side of the wall so it would cover the entire front garden and the driveway. They told me that was completely legal as long as the camera stayed on my property. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Now I've got another camera going up. One neighbor finally understands that I'm done playing around. And if I ever catch any of them back in my garden again, I'm calling the police immediately. And this time, I probably won't be so forgiving. Personally, I think giving someone one warning is fair. Giving them two is generous. But walking into someone else's garden with your kids and acting like you own the place? That's way over the line. If I were in that situation, I probably would have done exactly the same thing. Install cameras, document everything, and let the police handle it instead of starting a fight. Seriously though, how many chances do you think someone deserves before consequences finally catch up with them?
All right. While the gameplay keeps rolling, this next story is less about berries and neighbors and more about a family falling apart in the weirdest way possible. My parents got married when they were ridiculously young. My dad got my mom pregnant, their families pushed them into marriage, and my grandfather helped my dad set up a business in a big city soon after I was born. My mom came from a very conservative southern town where she was taught that a wife should be submissive. Even after moving to the city, she barely socialized. She had no friends, no hobbies, and almost never left the house. My dad, on the other hand, was basically just the provider. He made a lot of money, but he was always traveling for work and was rarely around as a husband or a father. Growing up, I ended up becoming my mom's best friend. We talked about everything. For years, I encouraged her to make friends and find something that was actually hers. Eventually, she started going to a nearby park and met a gym trainer. That friendship led her to join a gym where she slowly built an actual social life. Then, almost a year ago, my dad asked her for an open marriage. He told her he wasn't happy and that she wasn't giving him everything he wanted. My mom, who genuinely believed in being a Christian wife, came to me in tears. I told her she should divorce him. She said she would never be the one to end the marriage. At that point, her friend and I both knew exactly where this was heading. After a lot of hesitation, she agreed to the open marriage on one condition: complete transparency. And this is where my dad made the biggest mistake of his life. He was a 41-year-old guy with a beer belly. My mom was 39, athletic, and worked out regularly. I honestly don't know what he thought was going to happen. I helped her set up dating profiles about 6 months ago. The number of matches she got was insane. After talking to people for a while, she started seeing a few of them, and the attention completely transformed her confidence. Meanwhile, my dad hooked up with his secretary almost immediately, and apparently had very little luck with anyone else. Yeah, I think reality hit him pretty hard. Because of their transparency agreement, my mom told him about all of her dates and hookups. A few weeks later, he started picking fights over tiny things. He criticized her clothes. He criticized her appearance. At one point, he almost called her a whore before catching himself. Then he tried to suggest ending the open marriage. My mom shut that idea down immediately. And honestly, that was probably the moment their marriage became impossible to save. Anyway, while the gameplay keeps rolling, here's another update that honestly surprised me because I expected this relationship to completely fall apart. A lot of people asked me for an update, but I didn't want to post anything until I actually had something worth talking about. Over the last couple of weeks, my wife and I finally started speaking to each other again. The first thing I did was apologize for ruining her running shoes because, regardless of how angry I was, I knew I shouldn't have done that. After that, I asked her to promise me one thing before I continued. I told her not to roll her eyes, interrupt me, get sarcastic, or dismiss what I was about to say. She agreed, so I finally explained why I was so upset over my boots. I told her that I wasn't exaggerating when I said my boots mattered. Most nights, I deal with elderly patients, falls, or people who just feel sick. But every once in a while, I get a call where every second counts. There are situations where someone is only alive because help gets there fast enough. I've had calls where my training helped me recognize an emergency before anyone else did. I've had patients survive because I made the right decision at the right time. I've had moments where getting someone to the correct hospital quickly made the difference between life and death. I also admitted that I don't tell her about most of the horrible things I see because I don't want her lying awake every night worrying about me. This time, she actually listened instead of brushing it off. She quietly told me she thought she was helping by keeping everything neat around the house. I looked at her and said, "You're not helping." I told her I wasn't trying to be cruel, but moving my equipment makes my job harder. My gear stays where I leave it because I know exactly where to reach for it, even if I get called out in the middle of the night while I'm half asleep.
If someone moves my boots or my equipment, I'm wasting precious seconds trying to find them.
I told her that one day those lost seconds could be the reason somebody dies before I get there. I don't care whether my gear looks messy, because it isn't decoration. It's emergency equipment. It exists to do a job, not to make the hallway look nice. If she really wanted to help me, the best thing she could do was simply leave it where I put it. A few nights later, I invited my friend Rich over. He's a police officer, and he was one of the officers who worked that overdose call with me. We sat outside, had a couple of beers, and just talked. Rich explained exactly what happened that night before my ambulance even arrived. He talked about performing CPR, administering Narcan, and fighting to keep someone alive until we got there. Then he pulled out pictures from different car crashes we'd worked together over the years. He showed my wife one completely destroyed vehicle and said, "Your husband climbed inside this wreck and stayed in there, giving oxygen until we could safely get the driver out." Then he showed another picture and said, "Your husband pulled a 3-year-old child out of this crash." Then another. He recognized this driver was having a stroke before anyone else did and made sure she went straight to a stroke center. That probably saved her life. After Rich left, I told my wife I wanted to show her one more thing. Again, I asked her not to interrupt until it was over. I pulled up police body cam footage from an overdose response on YouTube. The video showed just how quickly first responders have to work. CPR starts immediately, Narcan gets administered within seconds, an AED gets prepared without hesitation. Nobody wastes time because every single second matters. When the video ended, I told her I wasn't trying to make her feel guilty. I just wanted her to understand what my life actually looks like when that pager goes off. I told her I hope every call ends up being something simple because if it isn't, then someone else's life depends on me doing everything correctly. If I lose time because I can't find my boots or because I'm frustrated trying to find equipment that got moved, I could miss something important. That mistake might mean someone doesn't make it home. For the first time, she admitted she understood. She said she'd honestly never thought about how dangerous my job really was until she saw those crash photos and the body cam footage. Then I brought up something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I told her I genuinely believed she might have OCD, not as an insult, but because her need to constantly organize and rearrange things had reached a point where it was hurting both of us.
I reminded her about all the important items she'd accidentally thrown away, all the times she'd moved my belongings without asking, and everything she'd done with my emergency gear. I told her I thought talking to a therapist could really help, and I even offered to go with her if she'd feel more comfortable doing it together. After we talked through everything, she admitted there probably was a pattern. She said she wanted some time to decide whether she'd rather go to therapy alone or together, but she promised she'd start working on changing those habits. Then she admitted something that completely caught me off guard. She said that when I exploded over my boots, she honestly thought I was going to hit her. She explained that she dated men in the past who lost their tempers over almost nothing, and seeing me that angry brought all of those memories back. She'd never seen me lose control before, so in that moment, she didn't know what to expect. Hearing that honestly hurt more than I expected because I'd never want her to feel unsafe around me. Over the last few days, she's been much more emotional whenever I leave for work. One day she actually started crying and told me, "I hope you know how much I appreciate what you do." Since we had that conversation, she hasn't touched my boots once. Is everything magically fixed? Not even close. We still have a lot to work through, and rebuilding trust takes time. But for the first time in a while, it actually feels like we're working together instead of against each other. Personally, I think this situation shows how dangerous it can be when two people assume they understand each other's lives without ever actually talking about them. Once they finally communicated honestly, both of them realized they were carrying problems the other person never even knew existed. If I were in his position, I would have handled it the same way. Explain everything calmly, show real examples, and focus on fixing the problem instead of winning the argument. But what do you think? If someone unknowingly crossed a line that serious, would one honest conversation be enough for you to forgive them? Anyway, let's keep the gameplay going because this next story is honestly one of the funniest misunderstandings I've ever heard. I had an important business meeting in the US that was happening only a few hours after my flight landed, so I figured I'd save time and get completely ready while I was still on the plane. A few hours into the flight, I grabbed my backpack and headed to the bathroom. I needed to change my clothes, wash my face, shave, trim my beard, put on deodorant, basically do my entire morning routine before landing. Everything I needed was inside my backpack, so, of course, I took it with me. About 5 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. I just answered, "I'll be right out," because I assumed someone needed the bathroom. Another 5 minutes passed, and I started hearing people talking outside. Then came another knock. At this point, my shirt was off, half my face was covered in shaving cream, and I'd only shaved one side of my beard. I opened the door looking absolutely ridiculous, and standing there were 3 flight attendants, 2 women and 1 guy, and all 3 of them looked genuinely terrified. I laughed and asked, "What is this? Is there a timer for how long you're allowed to stay in the bathroom?" The male flight attendant explained that several passengers had seen me walk into the bathroom carrying a backpack, then noticed I'd been in there for a while and reported me because they thought something suspicious might be happening. I couldn't help but laugh even harder. I explained that I had an important meeting right after landing and was just trying to look presentable before getting off the plane. I apologized for taking so long and told him I only needed a few more minutes to finish shaving. He relaxed a bit, laughed with me, apologized, and walked away. I figured that was the end of it, but apparently not. A few minutes later, there was another knock on the door. This time I opened it wearing a clean shirt and with my beard completely shaved. I asked, "Okay, what's going on now?" The same flight attendant looked almost embarrassed and explained that some passengers were still worried. Apparently, they'd seen me standing there shirtless with shaving cream all over my face and assumed I wasn't just shaving my beard. They thought I was shaving my entire body. I just stared at him completely confused until he explained why.
Apparently, some extremist groups have been known to clean themselves and shave before carrying out terrorist attacks because of beliefs about entering heaven clean. I stood there for a second, processing that information, and then completely lost it. I told him I was Lebanese, born Christian but not religious, and somehow this was the first time in my entire life I'd ever heard that terrorists apparently shave before doing something like that. I even joked, "Well, thanks for teaching me something I definitely didn't need to know." Since I could tell everyone was still a little nervous, I pulled out my phone and showed him the email for my meeting with the date and time, so they'd know exactly why I was getting ready on the plane. After that, everything changed. The rest of the flight crew came over, everyone started joking around, and we all ended up laughing together. You could still tell they were maybe 5% suspicious, but the other 95% was just them feeling bad for interrupting me. The funniest part is, they never even searched my backpack. Looking back, I probably should have just opened it myself. Instead of whatever dramatic Hollywood scenario everyone imagined, they would have found snacks, a couple of iPhone charging cables, some books, a change of clothes, and a toiletry bag. Definitely not the action movie they were expecting. Personally, I don't even blame the crew. If several passengers report someone disappearing into an airplane bathroom with a backpack for 15 minutes, it's probably better to check than ignore it. Sure, it was awkward, but I'd rather fly with people who take reports seriously than with people who don't. Still, if you saw someone disappear into an airplane bathroom with a backpack for that long, would you report it? Or just assume they were taking forever to get ready? Anyway, while we keep the gameplay going, here's another story that starts with someone trying to save a relationship and ends in a way I honestly didn't expect. I finally sat down with my boyfriend and told him everything that had been bothering me. I was completely honest and explained that the things he'd been telling me just didn't add up anymore. I asked him about the credit card, the payday loan inquiries, and all the other suspicious stuff that kept popping up. He insisted he had absolutely no idea where any of it came from. He also refused to report the fraud or open an investigation against the family member he claimed was responsible. Instead, he said he'd just pay off the debt himself. That answer already felt strange to me, but then the conversation took an even worse turn. More things started coming out that he'd been hiding from me. The biggest issue in our entire relationship had always been lying. Not little white lies, huge lies, and then even bigger lies to cover up the first ones. Every few months he'd promise he'd changed. I'd believe him, and somehow we'd end up right back in exactly the same place. Looking back now, I know I gave him way too many chances. I kept convincing myself that this time would be different, but it never was. So, my boyfriend is now my ex-boyfriend. During that conversation, instead of trying to work things out, he literally grabbed his bag, walked out the door, got in his car, and drove away. That was the last time I ever saw him in person. After 5 years together, that's how he chose to handle everything. We barely spoke after that, and honestly, I think he expected me to forgive him again, just like I always had before. Except this time, I didn't. I packed up all of his belongings, and once our city's lockdown ends, I'll give everything back to him. But here's where the story finally gets better. After accepting that the relationship was over, I spoke to my mortgage broker and the housing developers. Originally, my ex and I had planned to buy a townhouse together, but there was no way I could afford that one my own anymore. I was devastated, until another opportunity appeared. A slightly smaller townhouse that I also loved suddenly became available. I applied for it, waited nervously, and then got approved. Just 3 days before my birthday last month, I paid the deposit. I actually bought my very first house, completely on my own. Honestly, I never imagined my happiest moment would come right after one of the biggest heartbreaks of my life. But somehow, it did. Personally, I think this is one of those rare stories where losing the relationship ended up opening the door to something much better. If someone lies to you over and over again, eventually you have to stop believing promises and start believing patterns. If I were in her position, I think I would have made the same decision. Buying a smaller home alone sounds a lot better than building a future with someone you can't trust. But what do you think? Would you have given him one more chance after 5 years together? Or would you have walked away too? If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. I really appreciate it. Every single subscriber means a lot to me right now. So if you enjoyed hanging out and listening to these stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Trust me, it's a lot cheaper than therapy and somehow just as entertaining. All right, I'm going to end today's run here, warm myself up in this abandoned little shack, and finally get some sleep. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.